Whether it's instantly being blown up by a landmine or slowly starving to death, there have always been places around the world that just excel at getting rid of people, shifting the scale from merely dangerous to outright lethal. Pick any spot on the map and I guarantee that you will find countless wicked ways for the average Joe to meet their maker. But which countries are the absolute best at this? Which nations have become so deadly in the modern era that you wouldn't dare visit them even if they paid you? It depends how much. And which ones would be considered the single deadliest in the entire world? Interestingly though, a few of these countries we know that you could be from because analytics tell us so. So that's fun. Let's get into it. And it's going to be morbid, by the way, just in case you didn't pick up on that. And one other thing that I'll quickly say before we get started, sort of a disclaimer if you will, is that we couldn't cover every dangerous nation in this video. If you feel like we missed something super obvious, it's just because it closely resembles other on our list and we wanted to maintain a little bit of variety for you. It is the spice of life. Covering every country would require a 15-hour video to rank them exhaustively from least to most dangerous. And I don't like repeating myself, so let's keep that in mind. Also, remember that some countries are more dangerous for certain people than others, so I don't want to hear, Simon, I went to this country, it was fine, you're a lying dick! We know what you lot are like. Unless you visited every region of every country on this list or have researched it as thoroughly as we have, chill out, okay? Let's go. Just before we continue, a quick word from our fantastic sponsor, Sideprojects. And look, I like a good glass of whiskey or 2 or 5. What I don't like is the feeling the next day where I'm a malfunctioning human being who just doesn't have their shit together. That's why I have been using Sideprojects pre-alcohol probiotic. It's the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Basically, here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in your gut. And that byproduct, it's not dehydration, that's the real reason that you feel just a little bit funky the next day. Ugh. Sideprojects pre-alcohol produces an enzyme that breaks down that toxin. Just make it your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you will feel your best tomorrow. I remember the first time Sideprojects sponsored me and they were like, no, just drink this and you'll feel a lot better the next day. And I was like, okay, let's give it a go. Sounds like a good reason to have a night out. And I was pretty amazed. Plus, they've got a money-back guarantee, so if it doesn't work for you, they'll just give you a full refund. There's no questions asked. You've literally got nothing to lose. Hit the link in the description below. You'll get 15% off your first order. Sideprojects, drink smart and wake up ready. Now back to today's episode. You might not have expected to see the US on this list, but if every entry was simply another kind of war, it would quickly become really, really boring. Instead, we're taking a different approach by focusing on drugs. The US faces significant health challenges. With an obesity epidemic, high prevalence of diabetes, an expensive healthcare system, and even instances of toddlers involved in shootings, there are numerous ways to meet an untimely end in the land of the free. However, it is drug-related deaths that truly set the US apart from other nations. According to the Commonwealth Fund, an American not-for-profit organization focused on improving healthcare in the country, drug overdose deaths in the United States claimed more than 100,000 lives in 2023, the third consecutive year that this has happened. By a substantial margin, the US now has the highest per capita rate of overdose deaths in the world at 324 deaths per million people. What comes second? Well, that would actually be Puerto Rico, which is a US territory with 246 deaths per million people. Scotland and Canada follow closely behind with 219 and 193 respectively. So as you can see, the home of the brave, in a bit of a league of its own here. No other country is even in the same stratosphere as Uncle Sam. Moreover, while policies in Canada and Scotland have led to decline in drug overdose deaths in recent years, in the US, they've just continued to rise. Of course, one of the biggest factors in this situation is the opioid epidemic, a problem that Washington, D.C. simply can't seem to get under control. Every year, more and more people are falling through the cracks and into the arms of addiction. This is why the US is so deadly. If you partake in opioid use, you're more likely to overdose in the US than anywhere else on Earth simply because these substances are so readily available. Moreover, the drug problem's getting worse rather than better. New substances like fentanyl are posing significant challenges, and more recently, xylazine, a type of tranquilizer not approved for humans and particularly lethal in combination with fentanyl, because fentanyl wasn't lethal enough, has become increasingly prevalent in overdose deaths across every region in the US, especially the South. In a study of 20 states and Washington, D.C., there was a 4-fold registered increase in xylazine-related deaths when mixed with street fentanyl between 2019 and 2022. One of the key issues is that the US public health response has not been developed or executed on a scale that matches the severity of the problem. Everyone is aware that the US healthcare system carries a reputation for being both prohibitively expensive and predatory. At the same time, the overall strategy appears to be a patchwork solution, assembled from policies and practices that vary widely from one state to another. While 109 countries worldwide had introduced national harm reduction policies as of 2023, the implementation of such measures in the US remains notably limited. For example, some countries, like Portugal, make it easier for people to access important anti-overdosing agents such as naloxone and fentanyl test strips, enabling users to take clean versions of their dope. However, the US still maintains a war on drugs mindset, even despite the recent relaxation of marijuana laws. Guidelines vary by state, and some even criminalize test strips under drug paraphernalia laws, leaving people guessing as to what they're taking and ultimately leading to more overdoses and deaths. Syringe services, despite evidence proving that they do not increase illegal drug use or crime, and indeed significantly reduce much of the harm associated with injectable drugs like heroin, remain illegal in some states. This forces addicts to share dirty needles, further exacerbating the problem. So it's important to be careful out in the US, or you could end up as part of a particularly depressing statistic. This is one thing DC might not prefer to be number one on. But hey, at least they're not being invaded. No prizes for guessing that Ukraine would be on today's list. Ever since the Russian Federation invaded the country back in February of 2022, it has become one of the deadliest places in the entire world, which is a grim reality that war zones tend to share. In Ukraine, however, we have witnessed the emergence of particularly devastating tactics aimed at both the average foot soldier and Ukrainian civilians in cities. These new lethal methods are mixed with tried and tested old techniques of blowing each other to bits. The sheer range of different ways to die in this conflict is what's so insane here. For starters, there's artillery. It's ubiquitous in Ukraine, and for those on the front lines, the whiz-bang of nearby incoming shells is an all too familiar experience. Saturation fire from Grad rockets pepper the landscape, and if you're unlucky enough to be out in the open when they start landing around you, you are done for, especially with little more protection than a simple foxhole or trench. Larger missiles from both sides target military infrastructure, which can be fatal, though you might never know this if you happen to be standing next to a fuel supply truck at the time. However, the Russian military has a nasty habit of flying those missiles into civilian infrastructure, including hospitals, schools, apartment buildings, and even playgrounds. Then you've got arguably the scariest element of modern warfare: drones. These are everywhere and come in many different forms. Some are simply observational, relaying your position back to artillery so they can drop a mortar on your head, while others are more direct. You have the FPV, or first-person view drones, that can transform the safety of an armored vehicle into nothing more than a burning metal coffin. Additionally, there are loitering munitions that can remain airborne for hours or even days before striking their targets. Even smaller Maverick-style quadcopters, the kind you can buy commercially, are regularly retrofitted with grenades, artillery shells, or other devices that can turn a bad day into a nightmare when dropped at your feet as you try to sleep in a freezing trench. And with infrared variants, you can hide all you like, but unless you're underground and well covered, they're still going to find you. Vehicles, as mentioned, aren't safe either. They can be regularly targeted by anti-material weapons like rocket launchers and man-pads, or even by air defense systems designed for jets and helicopters. Still, it's preferable to be in a vehicle rather than on foot without any protection when enemy armor or BMPs roll through. These threats can blow the average soldier to smithereens in just fractions of a second. And that's before considering the other armed soldiers that you have to face on the ground. One unlucky headshot or a stray grenade bounce can end everything in an instant. Even if the battlefields of Ukraine seem empty, there's little room for relaxation as many areas are heavily mined. One wrong step might cost you a leg, if you're lucky. Even after that, weather conditions continue to play a significant role. Soldiers, especially the Russian ones, often have to sleep outdoors or in makeshift shelters, all while contending with Ukraine's unaccommodating mix of snow and mud for much of the year. On top of that, the toll on mental health is evident, with many soldiers opting to step out of the fight when they see no way forward. And that's not even counting the instances of friendly fire, which occur quite frequently in the Russian military. There are a million ways to die in Ukraine right now, and none of them are good. But at least it'll be at the hands of a human. Unlike our next country, you must have known this one was coming. Out of all the countries in the world, none have a reputation for deadly and dangerous wildlife quite like Australia. The continent is home to a host of critters that could easily secure you a spot in the Sunday obituary. For starters, many venomous species inhabit this vast land. Take, for example, the redback in Sydney, funnel web spiders, some of the deadliest in the world. They would easily kill you if we didn't have antivenom. Then there's the inland taipan, which isn't only the most venomous snake in the world, it's also considered by some to be the most venomous creature full stop. Taipans are a type of snake known as elapids. There are about 300 species of elapids in the world, and 60 of them, a full fifth, are native to Australia. These critters, along with many similar species, often find their way into Australians' homes, much to the residents' surprise. I mean, to be fair, they were there first, but it's not just snakes and spiders. Scorpions, various kinds of intimidating ants, and large centipedes also make the list. Moving up in size on land, there are koalas, which won't kill you, but they might give you an STD. Dingoes, wild canines that can be dangerous in large numbers, kangaroos, which you should definitely not try to box even if you saw that one guy doing it on the internet that one time, and cassowaries, the most dangerous birds in the world thanks to their dagger-like claws and their feet. Didn't know cassowaries were such a nightmare. Heck, even a suitably hacked-off ostrich will mess you up. And that's just the animal life on land. There's also a host of plants that can be dangerous. Chief among these is the gimpy or giant stinging tree, known for its sting that can last weeks, months, even years. It's so excruciatingly painful that it's rumored wild horses and dogs, once stung, frequently throw themselves off tall cliffs to end their suffering, earning the gimpy the grim nickname of the... Even the landscape itself poses serious threats. Australia is so hot that sunstroke and dangerous dehydration are constant risks. The outback is so arid, hot and dry that most of the country's population lives in a narrow strip along its edge. People have been stranded in the outback before, quickly meeting their end after days without water, food, or relief from the exhausting heat. Even locals often succumb to these harsh conditions. It's not a joke. But again, that's just the land-based stuff. When you start to approach the waters surrounding Australia, things somehow get even more dangerous. Of course they do. Various species of sharks, like the aggressive bull shark, travel along the coasts. Down on the south coast, you'll even run into the great white, which is an apex predator. Of course, stingrays are around as well. Rip Steve Irwin, along with the very animals he so loved that inhabit the coastal waters. Crocodiles. There's also a whole host of venomous sea life, including the lionfish, toadfish, stonefish, and various species of jellyfish, the deadliest of which is the box jellyfish, as well as the blue-ringed octopus and a variety of venomous sea snakes. Jesus Christ, does it ever end, Australia? So if you ever visit Australia, and after reading this, I'm not sure why you would, it goes without saying, watch where you step. Otherwise, you might end up as dead as some of the people who've had the wrong type of haircut. North Korea is particularly dangerous due to its leadership. For decades, the Kim dynasty has maintained political power in this hermit kingdom, ruling with an iron grip and enforcing a brutal regime that includes punishment, forced labor, torture, and execution for anyone who dares to defy the state. In 2019, a South Korean NGO stated how it had identified 318 separate sites within the country used for executions near rivers, fields, markets, schools, and sports arenas. You can be sentenced to death in North Korea for a range of violations against the dear leader's Kim Jong-un's rules. Offenses can be as minor as stealing a cow or as serious as treason, and even actions that seem banal, like watching South Korean television, can incur severe punishment. While those found guilty of breaking political laws are frequently sentenced to hard labor, punishment can extend to several generations of family members who are labeled guilty by association without any direct involvement in the crime. Some prisoners eventually serve time and are released, but others, they are worked to death in labor camps or just summarily executed. In some cases, inmates in labor camps are even decapitated to send a message to the other prisoners. The most common methods of execution are firing squad and hanging, likely due to their efficiency and low cost. However, efficiency and cost-saving measures are nowhere near as evident in the torture and starvation inflicted upon North Korean citizens prior to execution. This entire system of suffering is deliberately engineered. In some instances, executions are carried out in public, even in full view of young children, to serve as a deterrent against any future dissent against the Kin family. If you do something that truly irritates the regime or betrays the dear leader, you could find yourself executed by grisly means. Back in 2016, Kim Jong-un ordered the execution of his defense chief with an anti-aircraft gun. Although this method might have been quick and painless, it is an especially violent way to go and was far from an isolated incident. When people are executed in North Korea, they are often simply dumped or interred in pits, mass graves, or unmarked holes in the countryside. For many families, this means they'll never have the chance to bury their loved ones with a proper ceremony, leaving lasting trauma and deep emotional wounds. Others may not even know if their relatives are alive because they simply disappeared in the night, never to be seen again. They could be languishing in a prison camp, or they could be a corpse in a hole. With so few people returning home and sentences sometimes lasting decades, that painful uncertainty gnaws away at the psyches of the victims' families. Want to escape and defect? Well, that's shoot on sight. Everyday citizens must also endure natural disasters and regular famines, as many in the nation are food insecure. It is potentially the worst country in the world to live in or even just visit. Ask Otto Warmbier, who, while not executed, was imprisoned by the North Koreans for stealing a poster from a forbidden floor in his hotel. When he was finally returned to the United States, it was theorized that he had been tortured in an oxygen deprivation chamber. He would die soon after being repatriated. As a Westerner, there may only be one more country more dangerous to visit. And yes, it's Iran. You're really surprised? The Shia Islam state, run by the infamous Ayatollah, has been at odds with the West ever since its Islamic revolution in the late 70s, which, to be fair, the West absolutely caused. With paranoia at the helm, along with various kinds of secret police and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, there are plenty of people in Iran that, if you're a Westerner, you'd rather not meet. But if you're from a liberal democracy, you can travel there at your own peril. Countries such as the UK and the US advise against all travel to the region, and their reasons are clear. The moment your plane touches down in Tehran, you could be snatched. The second you engage in any behavior, even remotely suspicious, that's game over for you. Westerners are regularly arrested when they visit Iran and accused of being spies. Some of them might actually be involved in espionage, but the vast majority are not. And unless you are, that's a risk you definitely shouldn't take. Westerners face arbitrary detention, kidnapping, civil unrest, targeted attacks by radicals, torture, and even execution. Iran doesn't do this merely out of hatred, though that might be a factor, but as part of its political strategy of hostage diplomacy. Consider how damaging it would look for your country if you were arrested in Iran and left to languish there. Your government would likely scramble to negotiate your release, while Iran would seek something in return, perhaps an Iranian prisoner in your country, a captured spy, sensitive secrets, or backdoor deals. Needless to say, until that deal is struck, you would be spending a considerable amount of time in an Iranian prison. And some people spend years locked up there. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe is a British and Iranian citizen and author who was detained on charges of trying to topple the Iranian government. Although she was given only 5 years, so it might seem that it wasn't all that serious. However, she was only returned to the UK in 2022 after being arrested in 2016. That said, her case pales in comparison to others who have been held for over a decade without ever seeing their families, friends, or home. The longest anyone has been imprisoned, as far as we could find, is Saeed Malakpour, an Iranian citizen and permanent resident of Canada. He was just a web designer, yet he was sentenced to death in Iran while visiting his dying father. The authorities accused him of designing and moderating pornographic websites. That was in 2008, and he wouldn't see Canada again until 2019, and even then, only because he had to escape. They only repealed his death penalty after he repented for his actions. And that's a quote. So, there are many reasons not to visit Iran, with the government being among the most significant concerns. At least Iran has a functioning government, though. time of recording, for now, unlike our next entry. Haiti is today one of the deadliest countries in the world, a place where law and order are nearly non-existent. Haiti is both extremely poor and profoundly unstable, a combination that spells disaster for any nation. When the last leader of the country, Jovenel Moise, was assassinated in 2021, the nation quickly plummeted into chaos. Without effective leadership, violent crime groups emerged to fill the power vacuum. These gangs now roam the streets of many cities, operating with near total impunity and extreme violence toward anyone who gets in their way. These violent thugs, armed with guns and machetes, now control roughly 85% of the capital city of Port-au-Prince, leaving an already under-equipped nation even further devastated and enfeebled. They attack civilians, police, aid workers, and doctors, as well as the most vulnerable groups, including women, the elderly, children, and the sick. Everyone in the nation is desperate and fighting for survival, with almost nobody thriving. A severe humanitarian crisis is unfolding throughout the country. Women are regularly assaulted, children are exploited, and almost any street can become a battlefield, with over 600,000 firearms circulating across the nation. This proliferation of arms perpetrates a cycle of violence that makes mass killings a brutally common reality. Though the police and military are doing what they can, and even the international community has attempted to help with the deployment of Kenyan police officers mandated by the UN, the gangs are, for now, winning this fight. In the capital especially, this situation has brought the country to a deadly standstill. Yet it's not just the gangs that make Haiti such a dangerous and deadly place. For starters, because the country is the poorest in the Western Hemisphere, its people are frequently destitute and starving, which leads to a myriad of health and mental health complications that can result in death. Moreover, Haiti has suffered some of the highest death tolls from natural disasters among countries of its size and its relatively small population. Most people recall the magnitude 7 earthquake from 2010 that totally obliterated the country and left it struggling to recover, with estimates indicating that 222,000 people were killed. Thousands more have been killed by storms and hurricanes over the years. In 2016, Hurricane Matthew blew through the tiny Caribbean nation, killing almost 850 people. According to the Haitian Red Cross, a tropical storm in 2005 claimed another 800 lives, while floods in 2008 took 3,000 lives. Tropical Storm Grace in 2021 was responsible for 1,500 more deaths. Throughout its entire history, the nation has seldom had a moment to breathe, let alone take a chance to develop and thrive. It's like the very land Haiti sits on rejects humanity itself for daring to conquer its shores. Only a handful of countries face such tumult these days, and one of them is mired in a bitter, decade-long civil war, and that would be Yemen has been in total anarchy for a decade now. Ever since the civil war started in 2014, the nation has suffered immensely. For starters, there is the war itself. A Saudi-led coalition of Gulf states is regularly airstriking Houthi rebels who currently hold the capital of Sana'a. The fighting used to be far more intense, but the Houthis are now well dug in and battle-hardened, leading the conflict to slow down into a low-intensity affair, except when Western nations aren't also launching a few missiles of their own. The Houthis seem increasingly focused on targeting international shipping near the Bab el-Mandab Strait, a strategic choke point that sees millions of tons of cargo travel up the Red Sea toward the Suez Canal. And just in case you thought that was it, oh no, Al-Qaeda and ISIS are also trying to take advantage of the chaos in the nation to establish their own strongholds, because of course they are. Of course, any country experiencing a civil war with multiple factions fighting on all sides is inherently dangerous. However, the Yemeni government is weak, and its armed forces simply are not as effective in combat as the Houthis, hence the coalition's involvement. Yet this foreign-backed military support came with a caveat that has plunged Yemen into one of the worst humanitarian crises of the modern era. You see, the Yemeni military does not have a substantial navy. Had it, perhaps it could have done something about the Houthis trying to stop your Amazon package from being delivered on time. But because the Houthis have been backed by Iran, concerns have always persisted that Iran was shipping them weaponry to provoke unrest. As a result, when the coalition took charge, it enforced a strict blockade around the country, but in the end, this blockade did not stop the weapons from coming in, it only blocked vital supplies essential for survival. Yemen was already a relatively food-insecure nation when the war broke out, but the near-total blockade on all incoming goods to the country has caused a massive humanitarian crisis. Hundreds of thousands of people have died, while food and water infrastructure is regularly targeted by insurgents. Landmines are everywhere, and people are starving to death every day, leaving the country in total anarchy. Violence remains very common, even with the lower grade intensity conflict that's going on now, and parts of Yemen are still considered black holes of information because not even independent journalists can report there without being targeted and killed by one of the many factions vying for power. There is no semblance of control whatsoever. People simply try to survive each day, waking up in the morning to face the same brutal reality once again. There's too much to cover in total terms when it comes to Yemen, but it absolutely deserves its place near the top of this list. In fact, only a few other countries could even really be considered even close, and one of them... Sudan is a country that hasn't seen much stability in the 21st century, or in truth, at any time since its independence in the 1950s. However, the latest swath of violence rocking the nation has rendered it one of the most dangerous places in the world. Back in 2021, a coup ousted the political leadership of the country, creating a power vacuum that several notable individuals eagerly sought to exploit. By 2023, alliances between some of these groups had broken down and tensions flared. In mid-2023, the Sudanese Armed Forces, or SAF, and the Paramilitary Rapid Support Force, RSF, were clashing in the streets of Darfur. It had become not only the worst humanitarian crisis in the whole world, but also a despicable conflict, marked by so many war crimes that even The Hague is starting to lose count. Indiscriminate massacres, child soldiers, torture, sexual assault as a weapon of war, starvation as a weapon of war. You name it, it's probably happening in Sudan right now. Many countries are now asserting that the killings of certain groups in the civil war are tantamount to both genocide and ethnic cleansing. And the humanitarian disaster has resulted in even worse. About 80% of the country's hospitals are out of service due to direct attacks on healthcare facilities, while others suffer from being caught in the crossfire. The nation's health infrastructure has nearly collapsed, contributing to the outbreak of diseases such as cholera and measles. There are extreme shortages of food, water, medicine, and aid. Millions of people have been displaced, education is virtually non-existent, and infrastructure is in ruins. It is a bottomless pit of depravity, horror, and pain. Following the violence, the famines in the country have become the most critical issue. Humanitarian organizations estimate that over 500,000 children have been killed by starvation alone, with another 25 million people facing extreme levels of hunger. This level of suffering is almost unprecedented and can be compared only to the famines witnessed during Mao's China. And what makes the situation even more dangerous is that it doesn't appear to be slowing down anytime soon. Countries around the globe are actually benefiting from the prolongation of violence, meaning they have a vested interest in ensuring that more people continue to fight and continue to die. Nations are delivering weapons disguised as aid, fueling the fire on both sides while profiting along the way. Meanwhile, nations like the UAE are focused solely on extracting as much raw gold as possible in what amounts to a massive direct transfer of wealth, while the Russian Wagner Group makes sure its presence is also known. All of these entities are essentially trading another country's blood for money, though some are more directly involved than others. Overall, you would struggle to find a more harrowingly dangerous place on Earth today, especially during wartime. Yet, only one country on this list can confidently say that it remains just as dangerous even when it's not at war, and that is, of course, Is anyone surprised Afghanistan's here at number 1? I'm not, but that's also because I made this video. But this is Afghanistan, long known as the graveyard of empires and considered one of the world's most dangerous countries. Whether it was the British in the 1800s, the Soviets in the 70s, or the Americans in the 21st century, war, death, and destruction have repeatedly swept over this land. This is also the home of the Taliban, the Sunni Muslim terror network whose attacks have claimed thousands of lives over the years. But somehow, It is actually since the Americans pulled out of Afghanistan in 2021 that it's become even more dangerous for the everyday people who live there. It's important to note that Afghanistan is very ethnically diverse, with many tribal communities and populations spread throughout its landscape. However, the majority Pashtun Taliban's takeover of the nation means oppression for anyone from a different tribe who disagrees with how the Taliban are running things. And despite US attempts to destroy their equipment before leaving the country, the Taliban are nothing if not resourceful, able to repair and retrofit all kinds of US vehicles and weapons for their own purposes. This has undoubtedly strengthened their grip on power. Afghanistan is also where most of the heroin in the world is grown, thanks to the abundance of poppies. The Taliban have since taken over the cultivation of the crop, effectively seizing production of the entire world's heroin supply trade by slashing production to drive up prices. They've continued to use the funds from the heroin trade to finance their regime. So that's brilliant. The country is now under the control of the Taliban, who enforce their strict implementation of Sharia law. As a result, residents are required to abide by their rigid way of life. Women and girls have become particular targets, especially those seeking an education, God forbid. Following the takeover, the Taliban banned women and girls from all forms of formal schooling. Women cannot work in most sectors, may not travel without a male guardian, and their freedom to dress is tightly regulated. Non-compliance can result in imprisonment, violence, or worse. Forced early marriage among young girls has emerged as a growing problem, and civil liberties are routinely infringed upon, as highlighted by humanitarian organizations such as Amnesty International. To maintain their grip on power through fear, the Taliban frequently resort to extrajudicial executions, torture, arbitrary detention, and additional harsh measures because those weren't enough. Many in the country live in desperate poverty, barely getting by, especially since the Taliban's regime has faced heavy sanctions. Afghanistan has also become a magnet for other militant groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, whose presence has led to violent clashes when their interests collide. The result is a population oppressed and fearful, forced to balance the need for survival with strict adherence to the regime, all under the constant threat of a total authority looming over them like a sword of Damocles. And bear in mind, this is all taking place during what is supposed to be peacetime. This is the best it can be, while the Taliban are in charge. It is beyond dangerous. It's actively hostile. It is the undisputed champion of perilous places. Thank you for watching.